All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Michelle Benjamin. I am the Vice President of Marketing from Leasecake. We are here to talk about the top 10 tips for franchisee success. We're going to get started in just a minute. Before we do, a few housekeeping items. We are recording this and we'll be happy to share it with you afterwards. And we are going to be doing this top 10 tips, and we'd love your feedback as we go. So feel free to interject in the chat at any point. Let us know if you really like one or don't like one. We want to hear which ones are your favorites, or we can just ask at the end. But we'd love to hear your comments. And of course, we have the Q&A function available. If you have any questions, feel free to ask at any point, and we will answer them as we go, or we can wait till the end. So with that, I will pass it over to Taj and we can get started.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Michelle. As usual, kicking off Leasecake Live. We're really excited about sharing the top 10 tips for franchisees. Wait a minute or so longer. We've got, I know it's almost like standing room only, it feels like. And just for those that are curious, between all of the Zooms and the webinars, this is not a backdrop. This is a live Leasecake set. It is called The Kitchen, affectionately. And just to prove that, here we go. We're really excited to host many of these Leasecake live events. And why don't we jump in? Let's see. I think we're good. So I wanted to introduce an illustrious guest. He's got a lifetime of experience for franchising, with exposure to franchising when he was just a kid with his family's hair salon business called The Barbers. And it was it grew to become 1,000+ unit, publicly traded, became an international organization. It franchised brands like Cost Cutters, City Looks, We Care Hair. He later joined his family business and played a huge role in the integration and merger of Barbers into the Regis Corp back in '99. He's got more than 25 years of experience. And in the franchise industry, served as not just a franchisee, but also a franchisor. He's an investor, and he's on the board for many organizations such as Sport Clips, Cost Cutters, Office Pride, and the list goes on. Very prolific within the International Franchise Association, well, IFA. And I'd like to welcome Johnny Francis. He's going to share his perspective and expertise as a consultant, a keynote speaker. He's helped franchise systems and professionals really grow and see what they don't see as they're looking to have this multi-unit mindset. So we are looking forward to it. And John's experienced so many different franchise situations. And welcome, Johnny. Those words were a mouthful. So love for you to give a little bit more of your personal perspective.
Well, thank you, Taj and Michelle. I'm happy to be here, happy to share some ideas around franchising and being a franchisee. I grew up in a franchise, so I'm one of those kids, right? I thought everything was a franchise growing up, and I thought everybody owned their own business and everybody worked for themselves. And my dad was a real entrepreneur, a pioneer in franchising and in the salon space in particular. My mom and dad are in the IFA Hall of Fame, which is, fantastic. So I grew up working in that family business, family enterprise, and we had a hell of a time with it. It was a lot of fun and a lot of, classic mistakes. The company was older than me. So I'm the youngest of 5 kids. So it was just chaos by the time I was growing up. And my dad got us into all kinds of businesses and real estate and franchisor and franchisee and all kinds of stuff, landlords and development work. And anyway, we sold that business successfully in '99, and I went on to go do 5 more deals on my own for the last almost 30 years. But I've been a multi-unit operator, and I think that's the focus for today. My real experience started it with Cost Cutters. We had 20 units in Pennsylvania, and we lived in Minnesota. And this was back in the late 80s, 86, 87. My brother Joe was around, and it was really his deal, and I was helping him. I was still in college. And we remote controlled 2 markets, Harrisburg and Pittsburgh, of Cost Cutter salons. We were the owner, franchisee, but we lived in Minneapolis. And it was very difficult. We didn't have technology and internet. There was a lot of faxing. That's what I remember. A lot of travel. So that was my first exposure as a multi-unit operator. And then I did it myself with PostNet as a brand here in Minnesota and Wisconsin. I had the 2 states as a developer for the region developer, and then I had units of my own that I would own and operate. And I got good at developing and selling those units. So I had 5 of my own and 17 more in my territory, right? I did that for 10 years. And then I sold it back to Region or PostNet, that one, because the recession came through and I wanted to change gears, and we got into commercial real estate because the market had shifted when the rates had changed. And anyway, so then working through other brands like Sport Clips and Office Pride and Big Frog and a lot of different brands and systems out there, trying to scale to multi-unit is what a lot of things are trying to do. So I've got some experience, and I'm not a know-it-all, right? I don't know it all, but I'm a share-it-all. So I'll tell you what I think and what I can, and try to trigger some ideas and help people understand maybe what they didn't know or hadn't thought about, or some of the obvious things, but in a new way, maybe. So
Yeah,
I'm happy to share with you.
Very helpful, great background. I remember seeing the picture of you probably at the age of 5 in your mom and dad's first shop. So
Yeah. Yeah, it was our family business, was a franchise system that grew to 1,000 stores. So it was quite an experience.
That's great. Well, let's jump into tip number 1 here. So let's talk about becoming an active participant. What does this mean? Why is this important, Johnny?
Well, I think franchising is, full of opportunity for all sides. And this is really for the franchisees to remember that you buy a franchise to become part of a system, part of the brand. You don't just buy it for the name or the product. I mean, a full-on, most franchises are more involved in that. There's more engagement and more of a relationship involved. So this means, read the emails, go to the conferences, talk to the people in the brand, talk to the corporate team, talk to other franchisees, talk to the vendors and suppliers. I mean, passive or absentee ownership is, I don't think, a realistic way to have success in franchising. I think you really need to be all in, 100% committed. If you're going to be a franchisee and especially build a multi-unit scaled model, that takes a whole lot of effort and focus. So use what's available in the brand. So that's the people, the systems, the training, the conferences. Engage in everything that's available and ask for more, right? A good franchisee will constructively ask for more, but understand you'll never get everything you ask for. So be reasonable, right? The franchisor has to make money and stay alive and be profitable so they can do their job, right? So you as a franchisee want to be totally engaged. As a multi-unit owner, you want to ask, are there multi-unit programs? Do other franchisees have multi-units? Who are they? And can I talk to them? Can we have a breakout session at conference, right? I used to run those roundtables for multi-unit owners, and we'd meet for 2 hours and just share ideas about how and why you do that. Because it's different issues as a multi-unit owner. So ask for more, use everything that's available, and be reasonable, right? Ask in a constructive way, never be threatening or condescending. Say, hey, I'm interested, I've got ambition. How can you help me achieve this level? What's available that I may not already know about?
Yeah. So as we look at
that brand.
As we look at what a multi-unit mindset is a multi-unit simply somebody that's got 2 or more units, or is there a threshold? Let's talk about that for a second.
Well, I think that's a good question. It really depends on the concept. Some businesses are relatively easy to scale to multi-unit. We built cost cutters to be a multi-unit model, right? That was one of the early innovations. That brand was in the early 80s. And, it was built to scale, and that was revolutionary. And it worked, right? And it worked really well. And so did everybody follow that model, right? And so some businesses, like in that category, I know that industry well, right? If you get to three units as a salon franchisee, that's a different level of scale. That usually then you can start to afford a manager of the managers, maybe, right? And when you get to 5, then it really economically balances out. So that scalability. Once you have managers beyond your managers, I think that's kind of that mindset you're trying to get to, because the first unit is a lot of work. The second unit is just a stretch. The third unit is where you can start to add structure to try to build that scale. That's what you're aiming for as a multi-unit owner. It's a mindset of scale, not just growth, but scale.
Yep.
And this is what we're saying. Look for that in a brand. You know what? Here's a suggestion, maybe a hard life story is I work with brands that say we want to scale, we want multi-unit owners. I'm like, okay, show me what you got, and we go through their stuff and we look at all their stuff, and it says it's too complicated. You're owner dependent. You can't scale this thing. There's too many moving parts. You need to build systems or training or structure the deal so it's easier to scale. If it's too complicated, it's if there are no other multi-unit owners in that brand, you don't want to be the first one, right?
Yeah.
That means it's not ready to scale.
Yeah.
So look for other multi-unit owners in the brand and engage with them. I think that's a big opportunity.
So I think the theme here is ask questions, right? Ask, and
show up, show up and participate.
Yeah. Bingo. Yeah.
Be there. Yeah.
All right. Engaging with other franchisees. Let's talk about like franchisee advisory councils. You know, how does that work?
Yeah.
What's the path?
Well, if a brand has a franchise advisory council, usually it's a sort of a representation of franchisees, a cross section of owners, and they use an advisory council for feedback and advice and input and conversations. You know, advisory councils usually don't vote. They don't really have any power, but there is value. And there's certainly a lot of opportunity there. I usually say get on that advisory council if they have one. Try to participate and engage. And if they don't have one, ask them why not and when do they expect to add one? Because it's a key to success in franchising. So if there's a council, get involved. Read about it. Talk to those people. Say, how does it work? What's there? What can I learn? Right? You want to learn and engage with these people. They're probably successful or they're probably better than average if they're serving on the council. This general indicator of success and ambition. So hang out with those people, right? Because they generally have influence and they've earned that because they're successful. So engage with the other franchisees in a brand. It's really what an opportunity to learn from other people in the same exact business, running into the same kind of headaches, the same kind of problems, working with the same systems, the same technology, the same people. The franchisees in your brand are on your side. You're all on the same team. If you work together, communicate and engage, you can really learn a lot and help each other. It's a powerful thing in franchise.
Oh, we're hearing the same thing from franchisors saying, you know, let's get involved. And I think the ones that are open-minded and are creating that and starting to stay one step ahead, they need to anticipate what the needs are of all of their franchisees. So that's great. That's great. Yeah. All right, numbers.
Well, this is one of those obvious things, but if you don't know, if you do just balance your checkbook, like, hey, I still have money in the checkbook, I must be okay. I mean, that's okay, but that's like high school, right? That's not professional, right? If you're going to be a professional business owner, you're going to need to know your numbers and get the help, use the talent. There's technology like never before. There's resources and systems and outsourced and virtual and all the rest. Get your accounting and make it valuable. Share it with your franchisor, right? If you're proactive and say, hey, take a look at this, give me some feedback. How do I compare to others in my brand, others at my same sales level, other units that are in markets like mine or have been around the same amount of time or whatever, similar, you know, you're looking for similarities, trends and comparisons and ratios and formulas that you can say, how do I get more out of what I've got here? And how do I do it more efficiently, more effectively? And build, you know, again, the difference between growth and scale, you know, growth is make it bigger, scale is like multiply it. So you want to be able to do both, and it takes money to grow. I mean, you have to pay more, but you've got to invest more, and sometimes you're not making profits, and that can be intentional, right? Because you're reinvesting so much. So anyway, knowing the numbers is a big deal, and especially for multi-units, it's critical to manage and compare those unit performances.
Yeah. So we've got some more people that are joining, and I just wanted to reemphasize this is a Leasecake live event. So any questions that you ask in the middle of the session, easy peasy. Let's make sure that you get your questions out there, and we'll answer them on the fly. Actually, there's one that just came across. So on the number slides here, what kind of metrics are are the ones that you need to pay attention to
Yeah,
most?
most important, I see the question from Michelle.
Yeah.
I would say, performance is all about profit, honestly.
Yeah.
If it's not profitable, why bother? You can have high volume, but if you're just giving it away or you're overloading your team, unless you know in a bigger context that you're growing into it, right? So to me, it's about profitability and performance. So, obviously revenue and profits and margins, but then efficiencies. If there's ways to measure, depending on the model, if it's a lot of staff, your labor production is a big piece of it, right? If staffing is more than 20 or 25% of your business, then you're probably going to focus on that. So put some metrics around the big levers that you might have. If it's a product distribution business, maybe it's fuel or routing efficiencies, different factors you're going to look at depending on the model. Restaurants, it's food and labor and, real estate, right? You want to, it's going to cost, you want to make sure you're getting good value. Marketing and advertising, again, the easiest thing to do is cut back on advertising, which is the worst mistake most people make when things get tight. So you don't pull back when things are slow. That's, if you can identify the problem, it's probably more advertising. So there's so many different factors. I would say that the answer to that question is ask your franchisor for their top 5 and then start there, right?
Back to questions, right? Yeah. Ask. That's cool. All right, let's talk about disasters. Oh my gosh, there's all sorts of crazy weather patterns all around.
Yeah, we can go quick through this, but the main thing here is things are going to happen, right? Something's going to go wrong, and simple stuff like, hey, we blew out a hard drive or whatever. In the old days, that was a big deal, right? Maybe today it's your internet's down. Like, now how are you going to function?
Yeah.
All the way to there's a tornado or a flood or, catastrophic loss of a person, a vendor, a client. You want to think through what can go wrong in your business and how you're going to deal with it. But the time to do it is when things are calm. When you're worked up or things are, and you've got stressors and you're like, oh my God, you forget what you know and you make bad decisions in a panic. So it's better to have this what if list. And that's kind of fun to just brainstorm a list and then rank them and grade them and answer the questions yourself, right? And then tell people that there is a plan. Tell your spouse, tell your key employees, tell your franchisor, if something goes tragic, there is a plan. Look for it, or here it is. I'll show you how to get it. It's valuable.
It can be even more basic too. It's not just disaster planning. It's what if my printer for my order tickets runs out of ink, or what if I run out of paper? We've heard stories from many of our customers that said, you know what, you got to make sure your team knows how to think on their feet. Because the true stories are when you run out of order paper for every food order, as an example, if you don't have people to say, all right, let me go up and down the line, literally you can create a line out the door simply because you're waiting for somebody to find a roll of paper. And so incredible dissatisfaction. So it's not just, big obvious disasters, but it's just like, what if a piece of equipment goes down, like you were saying?
Well, and I think some of it, that's our operational stuff. I would also make a separate list of, I would say, owners related disaster continuity plan.
Yeah, exactly. Internal tools. How am I going to
exit this business? Succession planning might be part of it. Insurance could be part of that. Lots of things go into this, but budgeting gets important. When you're going multi-unit, it's even bigger scale. So there's more at risk. So you really need to manage your risk with this kind of thing.
Yeah, perfect. There was a question that came in about, the types of tools and programs. Are there any systems for managing things like that are dictated by franchisors? If you want to touch on that?
Yeah, I would say hopefully the franchisor should at least touch on it in training for sure. And help the owners understand this is part of being a responsible business owner, is you do things of this nature. Maybe they have an outline or a sample or an example. Sometimes there's technology platforms that capture this kind of stuff. There's a lot of insurance compliance these days. That's, used to be a spreadsheet and a checklist, and it was a pain in the ass. Now it's automated and pretty much, people have kind of beat that that issue from just chasing certificates. Now there's more to it than that, right? So managing risk is just a responsibility as an owner, I guess.
Yeah.
What I would say.
All right, we're coming up on the big five here.
Sure.
Vendors and suppliers. What is this?
Well, this is not a plant for Leasecake, but it sure applies to Leasecake. But this applies to really franchisees who are buying either products or services from the system, from the franchisor, or from preferred or recommended vendors. So when you work with a carrier, this really comes from my experience in PostNet when we worked with UPS and FedEx and DHL. And we'd get to know the drivers, and we'd get to know the regional guys at the hub, and we'd get to know people up and down the command chain of those different carrier companies. So if something goes wrong, I had somebody else to call. And the more I had that relationship and they knew it, gave me a lot of power as a franchisee. So I could solve problems for myself, my stores, and then other franchisees. And then I'd see these guys at convention. And it's like, hey, how do you do it? We actually knew each other. And it was really kind of fun to have those relationships. So as a franchisee, you get to know those vendors and suppliers and build those relationships too, because they know people. And you can say to them, hey, you see what we are doing. What else do you see? What do you see in this brand? Or what do you see? What can you share with my competitors without being, inappropriate? But you can ask questions like, how do they do it? What am I missing? Who should I know? Who can I talk to? Right? Using those vendors and supplier relationships, because if they're in franchising, chances are they work with other franchise companies. They could be some competitors, but they could certainly be some complementary brands. And they learn and see stuff too. So don't ignore your vendors and suppliers is the advice there.
Yeah. So it's knowledge and best practices. It's like, vendor suppliers that have let's say a customer advisory council. How do they iterate? How do you bounce ideas off of each other? Where you might not have an interface with someone in a adjacent brand, as an example. So it's a great point.
Well, yeah, we did a lot of this when it was site selection, and in the old days, you're looking for real estate data. So I'd go drive the market and look at the shopping centers and talk to the brands that I recognized where I knew somebody, and I could say, can you find out what you're paying for rent over there on that side of town? And I've got 3 more on this other side of town, and we were trying to do that analysis. Those relationships pay off, right? You wouldn't have that if you didn't have that.
All right. Spend more time at your franchisor's office. Ring the doorbell.
This is kind of counterintuitive. Maybe some people are like, why would I ever, right? And what I'll tell you, I'm going to tell you a story about a franchisee. His name was Bertio. And I probably shouldn't use his real name, but I don't think anybody cares. He's the sweetest guy. He's from actually Sweden. He lived in Iowa, and he was a barber, and he was a franchisee. And he used to come up to the office and just hang out and walk around and say hello to people. And it was hilarious because if you said, hey, how you doing? He'd come in and sit down and he had like nothing to do. So it was wonderful because he got to learn about all the different people and what they really did and kind of who they were. And he developed those relationships. And he and I got to know this guy over the years. And he was almost like an uncle at times, right? Like I knew him that well. And he said to me, you know why I do that? I said, no, why do you do that? He said, because I know, right? And he'd point to his head and he'd say, because I know every person and I know what they do. And I know when I need help, who I'm going to talk to. And I said, God, that's brilliant. He said, I don't just see him at convention. I don't just talk to him when there's a problem. He says, I know everybody in the building because I come here and I talk to him. So I thought it was, obvious, but brilliant. And the next step here with this is if your franchisor, I don't know if this is one of 7 or 8 or 9, but go back to training. When the franchisor offers training for new franchisees, sometimes the most fun I've had is when I had other franchisees coming back. Maybe they were in for renewal training and they got to go through like certain parts because these things have changed or updated, Go back to the training program and help the franchisor train the new owners. It's a fascinating experience because not only do you learn what's brand new and fresh, but they're learning from your experience. And you can build those relationships at corporate and with the franchisees. It's an awful lot of fun. So I would say go back to headquarters if you're ever there. You know, especially if they have a nice building in a nice part of the world where you want to be more than once or twice, you know, it's okay to go there and learn and share and really understand even more about the culture of the company.
That's great. You're right. Okay, this is franchise training.
Oh,
You touched
so
on that, right?
I mentioned this one. I'll go a little further on the multi-unit piece here is you know, if you're required to retrain, usually at renewal, I recommend that you have your franchisees come through training again when their contract is up. If it's 5, 7, 10, or any longer, they need to come back and freshen up their training. So I think it's good when it's a requirement, but if it's not a requirement, I would recommend it as a best practice. Certainly an appropriate business expense to go back and go to get trained or bring somebody with you, right? Bring one of your key staffers, key managers. If you're going to be a multi-unit owner, you definitely want to go back and bring those managers or those regional people with you and let them see and learn what's available from the system and who's doing the work at the franchisor. If you bring them in and train them at a local level only, you're really only going to limit their potential. If you bring them back to headquarters and push them through franchisee training, just like, and go with them, actually, I think that would be a best practice. Again, you're developing relations with the corporate team, the training team, the vendors who probably come through training, and the other franchisees in that room, in that cohort, you know, in that training class. It's just so much fun. So I think it's really valuable as an operator to go
You're
back.
reinvesting in your knowledge.
Yeah, completely. Well, this one's interesting. This is one of those, I'll say stretch. Not many people would be interested in this or even willing to do it, but I was, and I have, and I don't know if I'll get a chance to do it again, but I probably would, right? If so, this is where I've had serving on the Franchise Advisory Council, and you hear things, and sometimes, you know, we ask on the council, like, which franchisees are misbehaving out there, right? I mean, that's a fair question. And at an advisory council, you know, everything's private. You'd have some confidentiality. You'd expect to learn about it. So, and this was with a system, and I was on vacation. My sister lives out west, out by Seattle, and I was going out there to spend some time with her. And there was a unit that was nearby, and it was like horribly underperforming. And they said no one's really been there, and there's all kinds of problems. And I said, look, I'll go make a trip up there and represent the company. If you're okay with it, you know, I'll just drop in and I'll let them know, and you tell them I'm coming. And I was like an extension of the field team, right, as a franchisee out there. But I had the qualifications, right, and the experience. But I went with that owner and talked to him about his situation and why is he struggling. I mean, the store looked terrible, and you know, he was clearly not an example of success. You know, you could tell this guy was just hustling and struggling, just getting by. And I convinced him to either fix it and let's go and get back to the brand, or sell it, or just shut it down, because this is not healthy. You're not helping yourself. You're not really doing much for your customers, and you're certainly not helping this brand. So it was a reality check. And I didn't do it in a hateful way or a mean or vicious kind of way. I'm like, look, dude, you know, what's it all about? I mean, this looks like a miserable existence. And I was just out from the outside saying, look, I've seen success, I've seen failure, but this is self-torture. You know, why are you doing this? I mean, go ahead and fail and get it over with. It was kind of the advice. And so he did. And it was better for him and better for us. And I don't think the customers missed anything. You know, it wasn't successful for anyone. So, and not that I'm looking to push people out of a brand, but this guy needed someone to go have that conversation with him, you know.
Yeah.
And I've worked with others where it's like, you know, why aren't you coming to a conference? You know, I ask as a franchisee who's not here, and I'm going to call them and say, you know, you missed being at conference. It was so much fun. We learned so much. You would have had a great time. You know, why aren't you there? You're not helping build the brand. You're not, you know, unless they were in jail or a funeral, you know, I mean, where were you? You know, and asking that franchisee that kind of question is powerful.
Yeah. Well, I think ultimately what's great about the franchise business model is you're there to help your brothers and sisters, right? Whether they are in trouble or they're trying to figure out a way to grow, again, with that multi-unit mindset. How do I go from 3 to 5 to 10? making certain you hang around with franchisees that ask those questions. And if you've got the time and you've got the knowledge and the experience, share it, because there's consolidation going on. There's, you get relevance within the brand, and
Yeah.
as kind of a bit of an authority, or you've got an expertise, like you said, in ways to help the brand continue to thrive and be more powerful, whether it's a culture perspective or whether it's, simply just top line revenue growth.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, like any brand, franchise brands, as they get bigger and bigger and older and longer, right? I mean, after a brand hits 20 years or longer, things change, the dynamics change. You start to get second generation franchisees, the children of the owners, and now their kids are showing up. That
Yeah.
can be very interesting.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's retirement. People want to retire for different reasons. So, there's consolidation sometimes, and you can be proactive or reactive. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do to help build your business as a franchisee, but help the brand on a bigger scale. And really everybody wins. That's the goal.
Cool. Well, so we're starting to get some feedback on, what are the cool topics that we'd want to cover in the future if we were to, drill down and maybe pick the top 2 or 3. So please keep your comments coming. We get down to connect and share. Boy, I tell you what, this is all about, asking questions, helping your brothers and sisters in the industry, but, collaboration. I mean, that's really a solid theme.
Yeah, this one, and I'll just add one piece to this, is if you're in a retail, I spent a lot of time in retail service where we had stores, right? You had a physical location, and go visit the other locations, right? And invite them to come visit your location. Throw an open house, throw a party. I used to take my manager, when I had my sort of group, I'd take her with me and go visit other owners in other stores, because she would see things that I wouldn't see, and I would see things that she didn't see. So we'd drive down there, let's say it was a couple hours, we'd spend a couple hours, and then we'd drive back for a couple hours. So it was like a field trip. And we'd talk about all kinds of stuff on the way down. And then once we got there, we'd take a bunch of notes and pictures and think about it. Then on the way back, decompress and debrief. And then I wouldn't see her for 2 weeks, right? It was wonderful. She'd take the best things and put them in place. So when you're learning and sharing, she was sharing with those managers, the other managers, what they're doing and how we did it, and what was why and how it might be different or better. And then we got to refine and fine tune our performance. It was powerful. And then it made us more valuable to the region that we supported, because we learned, right? And not everybody does it the same way. And there's oftentimes more than one right answer, right? I think you got to believe and understand that. So learning and sharing, and physically go visit the other stores if there are stores. Spend time with those owners. I think this has showed up 2 or 3 different ways, but that's what this one is more specific about. Geographic in the market. Do co-op advertise, share staff, share inventory, share your scale as owners together. There's things you can do together that really add value.
Sounds good. We'll keep the questions coming. Okay, let's talk about the exit.
Yeah, you're going to get out of this business, right? Everybody does, and I've seen it done well, and I've seen it done poorly. And the reality is, have a plan before you wish you had a plan, right? Because things go wrong, tragics. I was just with someone who's heard about a terrible car accident last week. Guy's in the shop, he's out. He'll live, but he's out of commission for at least a month. Who's running his business? What's going to happen? So chances are they should just sell his business, and his wife isn't interested in none of that. So he needs an exit plan. Hopefully he's got lots of insurance. I'm not sure, but these are the kind of things that are inevitable, right? You don't always get to execute your plan. Sometimes things change and you got to punt, right? You have to have your contingencies and have your variables. But I think it's better if you're going to exit, and run it like it's for sale, I guess, is another tip, kind of strategy here. If you run a business that's like, let's say, very personalized or very dependent on the owner, those are harder to sell and harder to replace and really harder to value. If you run a business that's really structured as an organization, where the ownership is kind of, I don't want to say incidental, but let's say not dependent for the operation, somebody else is going to own that business and make that a whole lot easier. That's worth a whole lot more. So building a business that you can scale and sell, or you don't have to sell it, but you can hire someone else to run the day-to-day based on systems and processes. You can manage a business, down to about 15 days a year if you really dial it in. So anyway, I think there's a lot of ways to answer this question, but the point is take the time and write it down. Here's what I'd like to happen. It kind of goes with the what ifs, the contingencies, but this is more about how do I get out of this business successfully.
Sure. Start a legacy. So like with 1 unit, then you want to go to 3. And then the plan is, hopefully there's mailbox money. I don't know if there's any business that has mailbox money, but you want to figure out what the ultimate plan is. You probably pass it down to the next generation or new owners.
At what milestones are you going to reconsider?
Yeah.
At $10 million, we're going to reconsider. At 10 years, we're going to reconsider. At 10 units, we're going to reconsider. Take put the pen down and look around and say, do I like this? Do I want more of this? If you're not taking those intervals to really evaluate the bigger picture, you might miss a bigger opportunity, really. So
yeah,
those are important.
So this is the top 10 now. They're kind of in random order, but the theme is about questions and it's about collaboration. It's working with your franchisor. What questions do we have here for Johnny? Well, we've got him on the line. And again, whether it's food services or haircutting or retail-based services.
Yeah, or anything franchise. Well, I'll try to answer if I can.
Yeah.
This is Michelle. I'm curious if you had to boil it all down and give one piece of advice to somebody who's trying to grow their business, no matter how many locations, whether it's 3 or 100. Is there one thing that you would say?
Yeah, don't do it alone. If you're in a franchise system, you're not alone. You don't have to be alone. Sometimes these owners feel like, I don't know what to do. I don't know. Nobody wants to help me, right? They panic and freak out. And don't do it alone. As a franchisee, you've got a relationship with the franchisor and with other franchisees, and use those relationships. Ask for help, ask for advice, share ideas. Before you implement decisions, talk about it with somebody else and say, what do you think? And that's power in franchising, is that collective knowledge and experience. You only have it if you tap into it.
Yeah. Here's a great question. Are there areas that you think are off limits, for sharing with other franchisees in the markets that you operate in? Like,
yeah, sometimes, you certainly, you don't want to collude to, break any rules on pricing or whatever.
Of course.
But, wages and salaries, you got to be competitive, and that's America, right? So a lot of it you might want to be able to manage better than you can, but the market is what the market needs. And yeah, I think that anything that's off limits, some people are uncomfortable getting real personal or real familiar, friendly. I'm kind of, I don't really think about it, right? I just kind of share what comes to me as I think it's appropriate. But I think the more you understand what people's motivations are, I mean, everyone's got a reason they're doing what they do, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's understanding different people have different motivations. They might be in the same business, but for different reasons. And you got to take that into consideration when you're working with a franchise system. But I don't think there's really anything that's off limits that's not sort of common sense.
What about as you're looking to enter and be a new franchisee, whether you got experience in one brand, you want to jump into another, what are the key metrics that you would want to consider as a new franchisee? Because we talked about numbers, but before you go into a system.
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's investment versus return. Like I can buy this unit for 100,000 or 500,000, whatever it is, to get into that business. How's it going to perform? And if it's all economics, it's that's only one factor, right? Because I know with restaurants, I've heard, like, I'm not a restaurant guy by nature or experience, but guys that I understand, they're like, it needs to be like 3 times, the sales should be 3 times the investment level. Like, well, okay, so if it cost me 500,000 to open, that thing should generate at least $1.5 million in AUV, or you can't possibly get a decent ROI, right? Your return on investment. So those kind of metrics, I don't really, it's been a long time since I evaluated a franchise as a buyer. But I think there's much more than economics that makes a brand successful. I think certainly it's the culture, the people, the integrity and leadership of the leaders, right? And leaders, and then there's owners, right? And I think those are sometimes separate, and you got to evaluate really the cultures you're dealing with. And then, in a good brand, I mean, I hate to say this, but a lot of times I think those emerging brands, there's so much change and so much innovation that happens so quickly. Those first few years can really chew a guy up because you're going so fast and you're working so hard, and a lot of things change. So in my personal experience, getting on a brand that's got 10 years or more experience, a system that's got 100 or 200 units open. They don't have 5,000, but they don't have 500, but maybe they've got the first 100 or two, and they're growing. I mean, if they're healthy and growing, that's a model that can expand. So, if there's a successful one, there's 2 or 3 competitors coming right behind it. So sometimes you want to wait for the second or third one to get further ahead of the first one, and they actually have a better model. So there's always room for another good one. I mean, that's franchising, that's America. But I think you have to be careful to really evaluate the brand and the people and the potential of that brand. Sometimes first movers are the best, and sometimes they're not. It's hard to tell, any kind of franchise. There's so many variables, but I think the good ones generally survive. I say franchising is like economic Darwinism, right? It's the smart and the good that adapt and change, they generally survive. And so a good brand is an old brand. That's a less risk in a certain sense.
That's a great topic, economic Darwinism. So
franchising, yeah,
absolutely. Well, the theme, like we said, it's all about questions, collaboration, getting to know the franchisor, spending time. I think end of the day, what's great about franchising is it's almost like in any retail environment, you're in the hospitality business. So you gotta know people, you gotta be welcoming, you gotta ask questions. You always have to learn from the market. And man, I tell you, Johnny, you've got tons of great stories, and I know there's a lot more to unpack. So what we're going to be doing here after this session wraps up, as Michelle mentioned, we're going to take a poll of what are the top themes that we can drill into, maybe pick top 2 or 3, and continue the conversation. But it's been very helpful. The questions have been great. What we'll do is we've got a few more coming in. We'll answer them via the follow-up here, post this Leasecake Live event. And you're right, Johnny is great. You know what? You can't spell franchise without Francis.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity really just to share and try to provide some value. Great to be a resource, and glad to be part of the team with Leasecake, and look forward to whatever comes next. Thanks again. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.